Pirates. Pirate weapons. Pirates are known for using weapons because, well, if they didn't use weapons, no one would take them seriously when they're trying to rob them, which would not go well for the pirates. But anyway, what weapons did pirates use? Well, if you look throughout human history, you can probably find some instance of some pirate using just about any weapon that humans have invented. Minus things like nuclear bombs, of course. But, well, look, let's be honest here, we're not talking about pirates from ancient Egypt or pirates from, say, Japan. We're talking about pirates in the golden age of piracy. Because those are the pirates that people want to hear about. The ones that operated in the Caribbean, the Indian Ocean, and around the coast of Africa. These are the famous pirates. So, what weapons did they use? First off, let's go over ranged weapons. The number one most used weapon by pirates in the golden age of piracy was the musket. Now, which type of musket was it? Well, it would have probably vary a bit depending on the time, but flintlock muskets would have been popular relatively to how popular they were in Europe. Like, I'm sure there were some matchlocks and maybe even a few wheel locks used, but flintlocks were more popular in the New World than in Europe. At least until flintlocks got really good, because early on in their development, flintlocks weren't as good as the, say, matchlocks were early on. It took them a while to work out some of the kinks of the weapon. However, while they weren't as good generally, they were better in some ways. For one thing, they were actually more resistant to water than matchlocks were, because like matchlocks you have a match, and flintlock you have a flint striker. So pirates used the musket more than they used any other weapon. For, well, simple reason of range. When you're fighting on land, you can shoot someone fairly far away with a musket. Now, they don't have the range of modern firearms, but if no one else is using a modern firearm, that's not that big an issue. Also, you could shoot someone on the deck of another ship with a musket. So you're on your ship, they're on theirs, and you can go ahead and shoot them. Now, while you can shoot someone on the other deck with a musket, there are other firearms that are practical for the use of pirates, because sometimes you have to shoot someone at fairly close range. And in those cases, a pistol is probably one of your best bets in the time. Especially since you can do stuff like strap multiple pistols to your body and get multiple shots in rapid succession. Though, yeah, like these entire braces of pistols could have like many more than two, though generally speaking 2 was a standard brace, but there were more. Now, another weapon that's heavily associated with pirates in the modern era is the blunderbuss. And I'm afraid I have to say that while there might have been some pirates who at some point used a blunderbuss, it wouldn't have been that common. The thing is, the blunderbuss, it wasn't a very good weapon. Very short-ranged, very inaccurate. The only thing it was really good for was intimidation, because it made a really loud noise. Now, an alternative to the blunderbuss, another type of primitive shotgun that would have been more common just about everywhere, including among pirates, was the musketoon. In fact, I suspect a lot of the blunderbusses that people... a lot of the pirate weapons that people think are blunderbusses are actually musketoons that were misidentified. On to melee weapons. So, there were a few different melee weapons that would have been used by pirates and people on ships in general. One was actually a sort of spear called a boarding pike. This would have been used primarily to repel people trying to get on the ship. Like hold it out, stab them, stuff like that. And you also would have had some uses for axes, because axes are general practical tools that can be used for any number of things, and mostly chopping stuff like wood. And on top of that, axes are very good at chopping people, too. The most common type of melee weapon among pirates was the cutlass. The cutlass, which, if I remember right, originally had a similar purpose to a machete, at least in some cases. it was a very practical sword for ship-based combat, for a few reasons. So first off, it is a short-range cutting sword. Now, thrusting is generally faster and more lethal than cutting is. That being said, thrusting has some disadvantages. One is that, well, in order to thrust, you need someone to be at the tip of your sword, or you need to use a technique that shortens your sword's reach. And you can do it fine in close range if you have a short enough sword, which advantage to cutlasses being fairly short if you want to thrust with it. Another thing is that thrusting with a sword is a less natural motion for a human than chopping with it. So, if you have a bunch of people who aren't that well trained in sword fighting, and make no mistake, most pirates wouldn't have been very good at sword fighting. Some probably would have been, but most of their training would have been in using a musket. The swordsmanship training would have been a lesser priority for the captains. So, if you have a bunch of people who aren't that well trained, a chopping motion is going to be what their mind first goes to. The third thing is, well, the cutlass's length. Now, a lot of the times in sailing ships, you don't have much room to move around. So because of that, you don't want a really long sword that could, say, get caught in rigging or hit a ship's mast and stop moving because of that. What you need is a sword that can be well used on this pirate ship. And, well, that's what cutlasses are good for. Thank you for watching, everyone, and remember to like, comment, and subscribe.